Oliver, welcome.
Hi.
Oliver, tell us a little bit about yourself and what you do, and then we'll come back to what you are in a bigger picture sense.
Okay, so my name is Oliver Highland. I'm a podiatrist and I own Heal Wellness, Lifestyle and Gifting.
Fabulous. Now, podiatrist, forgive me, it sounds a little bit utilitarian, a bit functional. I have pictures of NHS waiting rooms and feet, and it doesn't tick the box, but that's not what you're about at all, is it?
Absolutely not. So it's been an evolution from the utilitarian idea that you're thinking of when you think of podiatry in a clinical room. And we've evolved to be a much bigger entity with a gift store that's based on high-end lifestyle products. We have a spa, so we have beauticians, aesthetic nurses, podiatrists, masseuses, and we also have a lounge, so people can come, have coffee, have cake, and then go to see their practitioners, have those therapies, and then leave feeling wonderful, refreshed, and having had a wonderful experience.
How did you sort of put the sort of podiatry together with the retail, the high-end retail? What brought you to that point?
That was a very long evolution from before podiatry. I worked in high-end retail, so I worked for stores like Selfridges and Harvey Nichols. I absolutely loved working in that sector. I enjoyed sales. I enjoyed the beautiful retail products that we would use. And after graduating and going to work for a hospital, I realized there was a lot of wastage. There was a lack of enjoyment and joy in a hospital. And those services are necessary and people need to do those things. But I think they don't see the value because of the environmental factors, the fact that they are so utilitarian and so grey and boring.
Yes.
And I had this idea right at the beginning that if I could fuse those two loves and I could make something that was beautiful, that people wanted to go to and had value and saw value in, then they not only would they enjoy themselves, and they would also benefit from the therapies that they were coming to attend. And it was bringing those two things together, really.
And just talk a little bit about where you're based and why you chose where you chose to be.
So we're based in Harrogate, in the town centre, but particularly in a very beautiful part of Harrogate called the Montpellier Quarter. It's probably one of the older parts of Harrogate. It's quirky, it's stone buildings and very beautiful. And it's probably the area of Harrogate that people think about when they think about Harrogate and Betty's and that whole kind of spa story. And Harrogate has a massive spa legacy as well. It's been around since the Victorian times.
Absolutely does.
And so it's a perfect place to add all those services in and do what we do.
Yeah. And do you find that your customers are from Harrogate, or are they or people who come in whilst they're visiting Harrogate and the wider sort of spa?
Yeah, to begin with, yes. I think services like podiatry, physiotherapy, and all those kind of general services tend to be fed into by the local community. But when you've been around, unfortunately, I'm going to say I'm a veteran.
You can't. I'm sitting here.
Well, when you've been doing it long enough,
that's all right. I like saying
you start to develop relationships with people much further afield. So I have a patient that comes from Dusseldorf every 6 weeks. There are several from from Cornwall, Derbyshire, Paris.
Surely not Lancashire.
Lancashire, just a few. We'll forgive them.
I'm intrigued about the one from Dusseldorf. Why? How does that come about?
They started in Harrogate, and I don't think they come exclusively for me.
I'm
think
sure
there
they
are
do.
Other things for familial commitments, but they email us the moment they have a flight and they know they're coming back to the area, and make sure that they have an appointment, and I make the time to make sure that I see them as well, because they are making such a big effort.
So clearly, had that been NHS, they wouldn't be doing that, because
absolutely not.
No. So what is it? Do you think about you, the brand, that attracts them to come back from Dusseldorf?
I think, like as we were saying before, it's the whole experience. I think creating something that looks and feels and resonates to them personally, it has their value system. The brands that we use, they're attracted to, they smell. It sounds really silly to say this, but if something smells good, something looks good, something is in nice packaging, all of those things count to the overall experience, and people are willing to travel further and pay more for those things. And I think probably the service as well. I shouldn't probably be blowing my own trumpet at this moment, but
please do.
Unfortunately, when you go to someone like the NHS, often you're seeing the practitioners that have got basic skills and are learning, and the more senior practitioners are going to administrative roles very often. So you lose those skills because they go into managing services, and that's a natural progression, and I'm sure that happens in lots of industries. But in private practice, you know your skills are still there. So I'm 20 years in almost to this now.
So I can say 20 years old.
I wish. 20 years into being a practitioner, and I've got 20 years of experience that would have been lost in the NHS. I'd have been in a much more senior role probably in managing teams of practitioners as opposed to seeing patients.
You mentioned in there your values. What are your values? And if you can sort of expand a little bit on how they help the business in its growth.
I think this is a hard one because it comes very naturally. And I think everybody has a code and a value system that's their own. And that comes through in the business. It filters through. And you can see that in much bigger businesses, you know the values of those particular businesses. Yeah. But for me, and I actually, if I'm allowed to name drop, I actually went to a conference quite a few years ago, and it was really lucky to see a lady called Jo Furley, who was the founder of Green and Black's chocolate, which is a great product. We all love chocolate.
We do.
And it really resonated with me because what she talked about was kindness. When they started the business, what they set out to do was to be kind, and so the product was fair trade. And it had all the right value systems baked into it from the very beginning. But they also gave it away at every opportunity, which is counterintuitive. They gave the product away. They went to lots of different places and involved themselves with lots of different communities. And from that, their business grew exponentially because kindness gets repaid tenfold. And it suddenly occurred to me that that's what we did naturally without ever putting a label to it or understanding what we were doing. We were always kind. We have an unwritten policy. We've never said no to a charity. Without realizing, 10 years in, we realized that we've given every time somebody's asked freely and willingly. And we have clients that we see multiple generations of. And we're kind to them and they're kind back to us. And I think that's been one of the fundamental things in the business. And even down to now as a retail store, the products that we buy have stories that we sell in our store. So they are women-owned, they're Black-owned, they're LGBT, they're B Corp certified. So everything has a story and everything is trying to do some good, but however small it might be, it's trying to have a positive impact on its community, on the environment, or just in terms of education.
And I mean, do you see, that's quite a long-term strategy, isn't it? Because if you give a kindness, you never know when that kindness
absolutely
will come back. But I suppose it's staying true. At times it must be difficult to stay true to that because there are bills to pay. There are people who have things that are needed now. How hard do you find it to stick to those values? And do you ever get tempted to change it, to make an immediate change to things like for paying a bill? You know, you bring in a product or service which doesn't meet those values but does pay a bill.
Yes, it's not been a major issue on the spa side of things, but on more commercially on the coffee shop and the lifestyle side of things, we have realised that that is going to be something we're going to have to look more closely at in the future, and we are doing right now.
Can you just to pause there, just talk us through that. What did you put in place, and what is it that happened that makes you think you need to sort of change direction and have a look at that as it grows, that area of the business?
The margins are much more difficult, and as we hope to expand in the future, those margins become much more important. So while we're small and we're still learning and developing, we're trying to iron out those wrinkles now and know what the strategies are going to be going forward that are going to work. So kindness is still at the core of what we do. It's still very important to us. But we're also realizing that there is a commercial element to these things as well that we have to make a decision on. And I was taught many years ago, and I think every business owner probably understands and works on this principle, the 80-20 principle. I know it's a bit of a cliche, but it works in lots of ways. And so we've decided that we work towards an 80-20 in the split of stories and goodness and things like just commercial decisions. So as an example, at Christmas time, we sold these lucky cats. They're plastic. They're not good for the environment. Mm-hmm. And there was no reason to have them. There was no story behind them, but they were fun.
Yeah.
And they were pretty, and they added a little bit of humour to the business. And we wanted them. Yeah. We have to accept that we know within the constraints of our society, not everything can be low impact. Not everything can have those stories. So we work on a principle at the moment that about 80% of the retail that we have will have those stories and will do some good. But sometimes because of margins, because of other commercial reasons, we have to go with the other things. Yeah. But as long as we can demonstrate and show to people that on the whole, the bulk of our business still has a story, then I'm comfortable with that.
And I've known you for all the time you've been doing this, but there has been no doubt that you have this vision of where you want to get to. But it's blooming hard running a business, isn't it? And following in one direction. It doesn't go in a sort of straight line like that at all, does it? It dips.
No, it's not a linear.
It's not a linear
at all.
No. Just talk us a little bit through. You've just mentioned there, you had to make a small compromise there, and I should add it is a small compromise because overall you keep the feel of the building of your offering. But talk a little bit about some of the challenges you've faced over the years that you've been doing this. And the reason I give you the opportunity to mention it is normally the first one that comes to mind is the one that sort of sits there and has been the most important one. So I just give you that warning, but if it is a warning. But what are some of the challenges that you've
been
faced?
So many. It's been a terribly challenging journey. There's no getting away from that. And I'm sure there are people, and you'll interview people in the future that have had a much easier journey.
Do you think so? Do you think with social media nowadays we get smiling faces, but it just doesn't tell us the truth of how businesses, almost all businesses, there are always exceptions, but how almost all businesses.
I think there's always challenges. I think, but there are levels of challenges, and there are some sectors where people get lucky and they're at the right place at the right time. They have the right investors. They have the right people around them. But I think a lot of people probably have to work very, very hard and have major challenges along the way. I think there are varying degrees of challenges. So some people have challenges and some people have challenges.
Yeah. And there is no doubt that, I don't mind saying it for myself, that getting the right people to support you does take time, doesn't it? And
absolutely,
the people you start with won't be the people you end up with.
Absolutely not.
People have their different directions. Sorry.
So we're working with a NED at the moment, remotely, and we're putting a document together because we're hoping to have some level of expansion in the next year or so. And this document's very positive, and it's talking about what we've learned and what we hope to achieve and who we are as a business. But then separately, he said, right, I want you to put a timeline together of where you started and where you are now, and actually tell me some of the things that went wrong. Tell me some of the funny experiences, things that happened along the way that you wouldn't necessarily put in this document. And that was actually more interesting, because you forget, as a business owner, you're looking forwards all of the time. I spend my life walking around going, this isn't finished. We can do this better. This needs to change. We need to move from this now. And you never look back and see where you've come from. And every now and again, you look back and you go, oh my God.
Are you prepared to share, because I appreciate it's going into the inner workings, but an example of something which you look back now and go, oh my God.
Absolutely.
Give us an example of where you were and where you are.
So we were renting 3 rooms in a salon in Harrogate, a beauty salon, and we were moving to our current premises, albeit the upper floors. We hadn't taken the full building at that point. And I was working clinically, seeing patients in order to bring in the revenue to help with the move. My husband, he was project managing the build of the new premises.
No, he's a chef, isn't he?
So he was a chef.
Yes.
And now he's our beauty therapist.
No, he's a beauty therapist, that's right. And a manager on the way along. Yes.
I married well. So he was project managing the build, which was extensive. And we employed 2 beauticians at the time, 2 young girls. So I would work a 12-hour day of seeing patients. And then I would go to the premises and I would start helping my husband, building walls, breaking walls down, tiling, anything that needed doing, painting. And we would do that until 2, 3 in the morning. And we would repeat this. And this went on for days and weeks and weeks. And there's one particular evening, we got to about 3 in the morning and I just had nothing left. And I was like, I'm going to have to go to bed. And we were sleeping in the building because it was just saving time. Yeah. And we had, it's really crazy. We had an airbed which had broken and deflated through the day for some reason. And I was so exhausted that I lay on this flat airbed on floorboards and pulled a cover over me. And my husband came up, apparently took one look at me and thought, I'm just going to carry on. So he worked through the night. And somebody had given us, because anybody that's not seen our store, each room has a wooden wall feature, and it's all very raw and textural. And somebody had given us some old sleepers that they thought we might be able to use and utilize in the salon. And I'd fallen asleep next to these old sleepers, and I woke up with bites all down my face because there was something living in them that I don't wish to think about.
First man to have woodworm.
That was quite a low.
I can well imagine. So why did you do it?
There was no choice.
We
had an aspiration. We'd made the commitment. We'd signed the documents. We had a very small budget. And once you're committed. You just have to carry on. And that was probably one of the hardest things with a business at my level, where, we don't get funding, particularly from other sources. No. The banks have never helped us. No. I've had lots of support, a huge amount of support from, wonderful people like yourself. But kind of the financial side of things, it's just been we have to, if we need money, we work harder. So when we opened the coffee shop, and I'm jumping a little bit here, I worked 7 days for a year. So other than a few days off here and there, I work pretty much. So I used to do little podcasts on WhatsApp to my friends because I never saw them for a year. And there was one particular person I would message every day, my friend Andrea, and it would start with an accumulative number of this is day 237 of the Big Brother house.
That's crazy.
It's just what you've got. It's just what you have to do.
Gosh, I mean, are there lessons that you've learned from that, or is it just something which people have to go through? You did it to an extreme, but
I listened to something once, and they called it the Valley of Desolation.
That's a good
and
term.
It resonates with me so much, and it sounds really negative, but it isn't. But it's a really accurate way of describing the journey. So as a business owner, you know the learning curve that we talk about. We have this massive spike at the beginning where we're being creative, which is why we all do what we do. And everything that's in your head is coming out and coming to fruition, and it's amazing and exciting. And then the learning curve starts. Well, a curve implies that it very quickly you drop to the bottom and come up the other side. But it's this huge valley, this plateau. And what I remember being told about this plateau is very few businesses have chance to implement all of that learning and come up the other side and to come out of that learning curve because of this valley, this very deep trough of learning. It goes on and on and on, much longer and much harder than anybody ever realizes.
Yeah, that's really true, isn't it? I mean, you can't plot an endpoint to that at all, can you?
Absolutely not. And it's an endpoint that keeps moving. It's a horizon that keeps moving. Because when we were saying before that we're looking forward as a business owner, and I'm sure you're the same, you're constantly looking at what you can do better, what you can change and improve upon, and where the next stage of the business is going to take you. And that horizon, that endpoint keeps moving. So that trough, that valley keeps getting broader and broader.
It's almost the hope of reaching that horizon that keeps you going.
Absolutely.
And yet it keeps going further into the distance, doesn't it?
It absolutely does. It's an ever-moving horizon. And it moves as well. Your vantage point changes all the time because as you're changing things, unexpected things happen. And you try something and it never quite works out the way you expect it to. And so you go, that didn't quite work. Let's go slightly to the left of that horizon and go in this direction.
I mean, that's a really interesting theme, isn't it? Because when you start the business, as you say, it's ideation, it's creativeness, mad optimism almost.
Absolutely.
But some of the things that come out of that valley of desolation, as you call it, out of your learnings, they're things and directions which you would never have anticipated or were never trying to create at the beginning, and you go a certain path and you have to follow those learnings, don't you, from the things those challenges, and take those new paths each time.
Absolutely.
And it's a business that stays still dies, isn't it? It's true. You stay at the bottom of that valley because you won't change. You have to keep moving. You have to keep implementing and changing. And I think it's in our nature as business owners. Yeah. I keep saying business owner as well because I have imposter syndrome, and I feel very uncomfortable with the word entrepreneur as well. And that's used a lot in social media and on social media platforms. And I always have to refrain from using that. I feel very uncomfortable with that term. Why is that? Why are you uncomfortable with that term?
I don't know, because it implies that I've finished in my head. I don't know if that's true or not. It implies that I've succeeded and I feel happy with what I have, and I don't.
That's interesting. So you think an entrepreneur is somebody who's done it by definition and has succeeded by their definition?
It probably isn't the definition, but it's kind of my definition. Yeah. I think if I was walking around calling myself an entrepreneur, I would want to be able to have evidence to show that I've done something and succeeded. And although I've probably done a lot, and in lots of people's eyes probably succeeded as well, I don't think I finished what I'm trying to do, and therefore I'm not entitled to use that title.
So will you ever finish? Will you ever be successful in the sense that it's a horizon that's forever moving? And sort of coupling those together, what is success?
I don't think I will, because the goal was to have a clinic, a private clinic, which we did, and then the goal was to have a spa, which we did, and then the goal was to have coffee and lifestyle, which we did, and I have 3 or 4 more goals now. So I haven't completed. I haven't finished where I am. Maybe one day.
Well, just if you're willing to share it with us, what are some of those goals, one or more of those goals? Where would you like to take it to take you towards that success?
So currently, I'm still quite the driver of the business. I'm the income generator, which I'm very fortunate and lucky that I love what I do in my professional job. And it's allowed for all these other things to happen. And I'm really enjoying doing these things and the creative side of developing a business and thinking of new ideas. But it's come to a crunch point now where one has to allow time for you to carry on. So I'm going to have to allow some of the clinical work to go in order to move on and do the other. And I can't do that yet because the business isn't quite there. So I think we're talking about multiples, which is a very scary term.
Tell us what you mean by multiples.
So to have more than one store. So we're hoping to have probably 5 to 6 stores in the next 10 years is the loose kind of idea. So like we said before, that horizon changes and moves. So it may be 2, it might be 20. I have no idea yet, but this is the horizon we're currently looking at and what we're aiming towards. And it's very exciting and very scary.
So you mentioned there that you will have to give up some of your clinical in order to achieve success. What does it feel like having to give up something that you're good at?
I'm okay with that.
You're okay with that?
Yeah, I'm okay. I've done podiatry for a long time and I thoroughly enjoy it. I always joke with patients and say I'm a flawed individual.
Meaning?
Deeply, deeply flawed in many ways, like everybody is. But I'm a very good podiatrist. I feel very comfortable in saying that. I'm good at what I do.
I would personally agree.
I'm not a good business owner. I'm not, I get things in my personal life wrong all the time. I get things wrong in every other aspect of my life. But I feel that I'm a very competent and very good podiatrist. So, but I need to develop those other areas. I'm enjoying the development of those other areas. And as the business side, the development of the business side has actually made me a better human being, I think, a more rounded person, because we'll touch on this at some point, I'm hoping, but I've been very, very fortunate that I've had amazing people in my life that have mentored me and become from my friend. And there are things that I do now, there are conversations I have now, there are things I've achieved that I never ever thought I would have been able to do 5-10 years ago. And I want to see how far that can go. I want to see what I can achieve and just how far I can push the envelope of what my business can do.
So you just mentioned those people who surround you. Just talk a little bit about them and how they almost push you, not physically but how they encourage you to go down that, take that additional step away from something you're so comfortable with in podiatry towards something you tell us you're not so comfortable with yet, or not the perfect businessman yet. Just tell us a little bit about how they.
Well, I think mentorship is a huge thing for me going forwards, because it's been so invaluable to me there's probably been several people among one you're among. They've been tremendously kind. They've given their time. They've given their skills and knowledge freely and openly. They've not been gatekeepers. They've not kept that information. They've wanted to be helpful. And there's been some, sometimes I'm just offloading onto them and having to get stuff off my chest that's going on in that moment. And other times it's collaborative and they're bringing stuff that they have issues with, and there's a mutual kind of backwards and forwards in that relationship. But with each conversation, whichever direction, the flow of conversation, I'm learning something. I'm learning something about their business and the struggles that they're having and the strategies that they're having to do at whatever level that's at. And then they're reciprocating and they're listening to me and giving me advice. And I think is one of the keys to having a successful business is having those people that are your champions. They believe in what you're doing. They have your back, and you can pick up the phone and just ask a question, no matter how silly it is, no matter how ridiculous it might sound to somebody else. They understand, and they're not going to judge, and they're on your side.
Yeah. I mean, I can only speak on my part, but our conversations have been sharing mutual concerns, things we've done well, ideas for doing things better.
Absolutely.
And that has helped me. And I think one of the things you do gain, isn't it, is a sense that you're not alone, and that whatever your business, we're services, and your services as well as goods, the challenges to becoming a good business, and indeed some of the things which are positive about a good business, they're very similar, aren't they?
There are parallels in every business, absolutely. And I think having somebody that are a few steps ahead or many steps ahead of where you are really important. Because why would I not listen to somebody that has been through those challenges, even if I choose not to listen to them and go through that journey anyway, which you often do.
Correct. We all do that, don't we? We take advice and then ignore it. We've all been
I've never listened to someone like that. But, they plant seeds. That information stays with you. That conversation stays in your head rent-free. And then later down the line, you go, Jim was right.
Well, I don't know about that. I like that idea of ideas sort of staying rent-free in your brain. It's absolutely true, isn't it? You do, and you get a good team around you, whether that's employees or whether it's colleagues or customers, and it does make a difference. It makes a difference to perspective, if nothing else.
And if you think about, I've never been in this situation, but if you think about bigger organizations that have boards, they take people on that have very specific skills to help in a business in a very specific way. But as a small business owner, you're all things to all men, and we don't have those skills.
No.
Some of them don't come naturally.
No.
I run away from numbers. I hate anything with a number in it. I'm great at driving the business, at creating and starting something off and getting it going. But I'm not into the granular detail. I'm not interested, and I don't like the spreadsheets and maths. But very, very slowly, you start bringing those people in that have those skills, and you're then in a better position to work. So those champions and mentors can help you with those things. They're the ones that can guide you. Even if they don't understand themselves, they'll pass you to somebody that does.
Yes. I can't help but somebody else can. And I don't know about you, Ollie, but that sense of being honest about yourself. We're not born to run a business.
Absolutely not.
We have traits, good and bad, all of us. And having people around you who have different traits can push you to other people, that network. You're not networking for networking's sake. You're genuinely looking to learn, aren't you, and improve what you do, how you do it.
Yeah, because I mean, network's a bit of a dirty word for me.
Yeah, it doesn't sound right. It sounds very, very sort of functional, doesn't it?
And networking implies a very different thing to me. It's people selling services to each other, and I don't think that's necessarily the case. You need people that sometimes you pay people for those services, and that's important, but there has to be an honesty behind it. There has to be a genuine want and need for that person to succeed. I think that's where the mentorship steps in, and that word is different. And I think that's, what you do and other people do. You genuinely care about what somebody's doing, and that pulls through everything else because your desire there is to see somebody succeed.
Yeah. And I think, from this side, it's a pleasure to see somebody succeed and do well. And it's, you want people to do well. So I think people are willing to give, and they like to be asked as well. So it sort of works symbiotically, doesn't it?
Absolutely.
Just tell us at the moment, you're talking about a mentor who's helping you get to the next stage. Just describe a little bit about how you just mentioned there that he's asked you to set out some issues in the past.
Yes.
But looking forward, what's he trying to? How's he trying to steer you to the next stage?
Well, for probably the last 10 years, I've been in a car crash.
Car crash? Just working hard, you mean?
Well, working hard, yeah. So when you're working in and again, these all sound really cliche, when you're in the business and you're working, it's very hard for you to see beyond what you're doing in that moment. So you just, you're constantly bashing into new obstacles and going, let's deal with that one thing. Yes. And you have a very clear sense in your own self what your business is and what it feels like and what it's about. But actually, that's quite a complex thing to explain in a soundbite to get other people to understand. And very often, it takes other people to drag that out of you. So at the moment, it's exactly what he's doing, is he's slowly teasing out of me what the values of the business are, what our aspirations are, what kind of clients that we are going to be attracted to us, what the demographics are. So, and it's really interesting to see all that stuff coming out, because I know it, I can feel it, but actually seeing it on paper and understanding it and being able to explain it to somebody else in a succinct way is quite a hard thing to do.
So has he got you describing your vision, your mission?
Yes, the words that we use, what we are, what we're not. It's quite an interesting exercise to go through. Yeah.
And I suppose if you're going to be growing to 5, 10, however many stores it is, you can't be in all those stores at all times, can you? So I suppose you're going to have to distill the essence of who you are through people understanding your purpose, your vision, your mission.
Exactly. You've got to have it. It has to be clear, not just for the customer, but it has to be clear to your team and the teams the teams that will come forward in the future. So I can't, it can't live in my head for the rest for all this time. It has to come out. So it's just trying to get it, format it in a way that makes sense to other people and not just me.
And it matters very much, doesn't it? Because there'll be other people doing the things that you do, but they won't be doing it in the same way.
Yeah.
And therefore, I imagine that it's really important that those that you employ buy into your values, the kindness, the mission, so that they understand what they're delivering, that it's symbiotic with their customer as well.
Yeah, because I can tell you about the values of the business, and I can tell you what I want to achieve and who we are. But we need a 4-hour long podcast extra, ancillary to this one in order to explain it. And it's boiling and boiling and boiling and boiling something down until you get to the sweet sticky sauce at the bottom. It's just trying to get to this little 3-liner, and every word matters. Every single word means something. And that's really hard to do. It's really, really hard, much harder than it sounds.
Yeah. Or else you're just another one of them that provides that service, aren't you, if you don't have that clear sort of destiny point. Just a sort of quick fire question. If you were to name one thing that your current self would advise your younger self starting out again, what would you advise yourself? And it can't be don't do it. Well, I suppose it could be don't do it, but what would you...
That's a really hard one, isn't it?
It is a hard one.
I want to say run.
Run. Yeah. It's not what you imagined would be one, wouldn't it? Whichever way you take that.
Yeah. I don't get me wrong. I am enjoying, and I'm very, very excited about what's going to happen in the future. And I don't regret it. But to say it's going to be hard, again, I can't speak for everybody else's journey, but for your journey, it's gonna be hard, and you're gonna lose friends, and you're gonna make sacrifices, and you it's just that's it really, and that sounds really negative, and I don't actually mean it to be negative. It's the preparation for what's to come. To create anything great, to do anything with meaning, there has to be sacrifice. You don't become a lawyer without years of studying. Yeah. You don't create a wonderful business without making those big sacrifices. And every time you learn something, there's been a sacrifice in it. The first time you have to fire somebody,
it's really hard.
It's really, really hard. And, you go through a lot of anguish, leave a little of your humanity behind and get it back again afterwards.
That's an interesting one, isn't it? Because I think people see in the press big corporations firing people, but when you're small, people matter. They matter to you personally, and you're having to take tough decisions, perhaps because, COVID being a prime example, because you're forced to take decisions you might not want to take.
Absolutely, and especially when there are personalities, are there? So, kindness, we talked about the fact that kindness is at the core of what we do, of what I do. So trying to fire somebody in a kind way is a very difficult thing to do. It can be done, but there's a lot of learning involved, and learning not to, I have to say, and it's probably a character flaw, I like to be liked. We all probably do. So all these things go against it's not a natural thing to do.
No, it's not.
And you have to learn not to be liked. You have to learn to give information that isn't going to be received well, but no, it's for the greater good of other people potentially, even if they can't see or understand it. And I don't have children, but I often think it must be how a parent feels, because your child is unaware of the bigger picture and understanding as an adult and a parent why you've made a choice. They just say it's not fair because it's not the outcome they want.
Yes.
And the reality is it's probably very fair, and it's probably in their best interest, but they can't see or understand that. And I think it sounds awful to say this, doesn't it? But it's probably very reminiscent of most employees, particularly at a certain level. If you're talking about people that are working in the service sector, as an example, they're very clever people, and they're amazing at what they do, but there are limitations in their knowledge and in that bigger business sense, and so you're having to make a decision that they don't fully understand, and that isn't necessarily going to go down very well. So I've learned to do that, but that's been a difficult challenge because it's not who I am.
No, I mean, we've shared this many a time, but I think that's one of the hardest things, that we both like people and we both like to be liked.
Absolutely.
And you don't employ somebody in order to fire them. That's not the game at all. You want to make sure that they're looked after, but the business is about more than any one person, isn't it?
Absolutely.
And we talk about our businesses as teenagers sometimes, don't we?
They are.
They really are, aren't they? They're pimply. They think they know best. They're constantly evolving. The analogies go on and on about.
There's loads of them. It's like a gremlin, isn't it? That kind of don't feed them after midnight, and they just get bigger and bigger, and they turn to these horrible things that throw stuff back at you.
And there must be times when you look at the business and think, "Oh, that's a horrible thing," like a horrible teenager, and you don't want to be there at times, and other times it's the best thing you've ever done. It's no 2 days or 2 weeks or 2 months are ever the same, are they? In that sense,
I always think about. I think about these things too much. I think about the ancient Romans and how they felt the gods were playing them like chess pieces, because there are times in your business where you couldn't write the sequence of events that have taken place. It's almost statistically impossible to happen, but all of these things have happened in short succession. And you can just imagine somebody with you as a chess piece, and they're pushing you, kind of going, "It's going to pop any second. I could just put one more thing into there, and it's going to go." Yeah, because it's just so random and so.
It is, isn't it? And it's affected by things which you don't have control over. I'm not necessarily talking about people, but environments. It's fair to say that costs after the war, or the energy costs, have gone up, and of course we've had COVID as well. So it's factors outside of your control, isn't it, that very much influence the way in which you've got to then make decisions for the business.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Just out of interest, just change the subject completely. The new government's talking about looking again at business rates to create a bit of equality between businesses on the high street and those who operate via the internet. Any thoughts on that? Well, I mean, you are a ratepayer, aren't you?
I am,
a retail unit. I imagine that's quite a large chunk of your.
It is, as are rents and quite a few other things. I think the rates, looking at the rates, is really important, and I think it could be really helpful to businesses in keeping the high street going. I think also the landlords need to really look at what they expect for a return on their properties. I don't think the traffic there is anymore that used to be there on the high street. And I think everybody needs to reassess what the high street is there for and what the cost of that is, because we're at risk of losing it. You can see it everywhere you go. There are empty units. Businesses fail very, very quickly.
We're not just talking about Harrogate here,
are we? Not just talking about everywhere. You go, wherever you go, even cities. You go, I hate to name drop a city, but if you go to Leeds, it's a really sad looking place at the moment, and as are lots of other cities and towns. And I think it's indicative of the fact that the high street is so expensive. People's shopping habits have changed. But the high street brings us so much more than just the retail and the shops. There's a lot of ancillary services and businesses that function around those things. And if they're not there, sooner, it's like an ecosystem, sooner or later it'll fail and we'll lose it forever in the way that we understand it right now. And I think the government has to look at rates, absolutely, but I think there are lots of other people that need to assess the pricing structure of being on a high street. Yeah.
And look, let's just move on a little bit. In your industry itself, what are some of the trends, if you like, that are happening? Some of the things which are happening which could make a positive difference for what you're doing?
In terms of spa, or in terms of the cafe?
Well, I suppose it's two, isn't it? It's the you have got the cafe. I always think of it as the sort of spa, the health side of it. But the environment is clearly on the agenda, and people are thinking greener, perhaps a little bit more. They've got a more positive vision of what health means to them, preventative as well as we talk about the NHS and if we invested more in prevention rather than cure. What are the sort of things that are happening in either part of your business, the general trends, if you like, which might influence it?
We could probably break it into three. So personally, on a podiatry front, I think I have noticed more and more people coming through for services that were traditionally gone through the NHS. I think that because of the waiting times and people are having to wait longer for particularly some of those smaller services that are not life-threatening, they're choosing actively to go into private medicine instead and rather than wait. So I do surgeries, albeit minor surgeries, and I might have done a couple of months, maybe several years ago, and I'm probably doing 1 or 2 a week at the moment because people are not prepared to wait as long as they would have to in the NHS, so they're opting to pay. They may have hung on previously and waited a little bit longer and tried to get into that system. So people are beginning to realise that the NHS can't cope and are looking for alternative solutions.
I'm not saying whether it's a societal good, but it must be helpful from a business point of view to see that grow.
Yeah, no, it is, absolutely. And I think that's going to continue to trend as well and become more so, because I think we have to accept that I think we're all in agreement that the NHS is broke and has to change.
Yes.
We're not yet brave enough to have the conversation of what that looks like. Nobody's willing to start that conversation. But I think on an individual basis, we all know that. So people are just looking for alternative ways of doing things. And I'm constantly having conversations with patients about other health matters, not necessarily relating to their feet, where they're opting to go and see a surgeon or a specialist or a physiotherapist or a chiropractor for that service, where they may have previously just held on and gone through the system.
So that's creating a network of others with the ability to deliver sort of quasi-medical solutions.
Absolutely.
It's like the chiropractors and the...
Yeah, I think you need to find alternatives, don't you? So you do, if you can't do physiotherapy, do osteopathy or chiropractic. If you can't get in with your podiatrist in the NHS, then you find a podiatrist outside of the NHS. And I think that's a good thing for those that can. I realise there are people that can't necessarily afford those services, and that's a challenge, and we need to look at that as a society. Everybody should have access, but I think that the people that can, and it's an affordable, achievable thing to do, it's worth doing. From a spa general side of things, I think health is an ever-changing thing and has fashions and trends like everything else. So you see the demand for certain services changing over time based on what the current trends are for that particular health need. And that's based on what a celebrity is doing on television or a seasonal thing. So you do see those ebb and flow quite regularly, and they come back round again. So that's very fashion-led, I have to say, the spa side of things.
So does it help to have the different facets to the business to act as a buffer against sort of fads, if I can put it that way, the trends, if you will?
Yeah, I think that was one of the major ideas about Heal in its entirety, was that, as an example, coffee through the lockdowns was reflected that it was bulletproof. It was seen as being an essential service, and people were having coffee. The downside to that is that everybody opened a coffee shop.
Yes.
So most times there's a saturation at the moment for coffee, and I think that's going to have to plateau at some point, and some of those, unfortunately, those businesses won't succeed. But the idea of the lifestyle and gifting, the coffee, the spa, was that we're creating a business that has many arms to it. So people come to it for different things, but discover and use the other services or products while they're there.
We've mentioned retail a couple of times without actually saying what that is, just mention to our listeners what retail is, what you sell beyond coffee and the podiatry and other health services.
So the retail was born from conversations with every patient. Part of the conversation at the end of every session is usually on what you do with the rest of your day. It's a bit like a hairdresser, the staples. Yeah. And generally, most people said they were meeting somebody for coffee and they had to go buy a gift because it was somebody's birthday. And after years of hearing this, I thought, well, I can do that. And our clients are time poor, they're very busy, they work, they have children, grandchildren, elderly parents, that sandwich generation. And I thought, well, I can help them. I can make it a much more time efficient journey for them. And we can keep them in our building. So we have the spa, we have the coffee, and then the lifestyle and gifting. So we sell everything from confectionery to jewelry, soap, and alcohol and everything in between, but they all have stories. They're all niche, small brands, so they're all independents in their own right. Or the 80-20 that we said before, so 80%. We endeavour to always be that if we can. So they're independents, they're black-owned, LGBT friendly, B Corp certified. We try and find something that we can anchor to them to say that they're trying to make an impact or a difference, whether that be on the environment or the community. So 80% of what we sell in the store has a story and is trying to do some good. And we feel that sits alongside the heal and healing kind of idea of the business. So when you come into the building to be healed, whether that be through mindfulness of having a spa treatment or whether that's seeing a practitioner and having a medical treatment. Our coffee has one of the highest B Corp ratings in the world, is in the top 5 percentile for B Corp status. So it's doing. For
those who don't know, B Corp status is what you describe it.
I'll put it in my words, and I'm going to get told off by B Corp. So apologies, B Corp. So the way I describe it is it's an accreditation that has very high standards and on environmental, social, and ecological standards, and you have to go. It takes a lot of effort to get the accreditation, and there's a number attached to that accreditation which tells you how highly you rank and how much you comply. And our coffee as one of the highest, so we're very lucky to have them. And our spa brand is B Corp certified as well. So we go to great lengths to ensure that the products that we use are trying to do something that's, if not do no harm, is healing its community or trying to lessen its impact on the environment. So everything's healing in some way.
So you mentioned community there, and as part of or around your business, you feel, I know, that you support the community. Just talk a little bit about what that community looks like to you outside of the immediate building, if you like.
It's huge. We talked about the mentorship, but I think that goes beyond into the wider community as well. We're only as good as the people that support us, and there's a relationship between you and the people that use your business. They support you and you hopefully support them back in some way. So we talked about the importance of the high street, and this is part of that importance, because we go to the huge effort of being on that high street for their convenience, and they get to walk in, they have somewhere they can have coffee, they can meet their friends, they can find the products that they need, and I mean, I describe it as a coral reef, particularly when it comes to the economics of the business, because we have a high street filled with independents, and we have a high street filled with bigger organizations. And I'm not demonizing them and saying they're bad, because they're not, and they're necessary. However, my business helps the community in a very, very different way. When somebody comes into my coffee shop and buys a product or has a coffee or uses the spa, that money goes into my business, and my heart and my life is in Harrogate. I live in Harrogate. I eat in the restaurants in Harrogate. I buy from other independents in Harrogate. I employ, I think we're up to 9 staff, give or take a few. And then we have all those ancillary businesses, all those suppliers, all those other independents that are in my shop that we sell, and the coffee suppliers and the cleaners and the accountants and lawyers, and all of those people are in Harrogate. So that money stays in our community, and they spend that money in our community, and it stays. That money stays with us and keeps being recycled in our community. If you go to one of those bigger organisations, which are necessary and are in our town and need to be supported in a different way, but that money disappears.
Yeah.
And it goes to London or Europe or wherever it goes. And I say this to everybody, that the moment the money's not in our town, the moment it's not a viable option, those big organisations will pull the plug. They will walk away, and they do not care what happens to that community. Whereas independent businesses like you and me, we care. And it's our lifeblood. It's our dreams. It's our aspirations. It's our hopes. And so we're not going to pull the plug quite so easily. We stay there and we persevere, and we sleep on flat mattresses and get bitten by bugs out of sleepers in order to make those things work. And I think so that reciprocation has to be there. Those people need to understand what it takes for those businesses to be maintained and stay there, and what's been sacrificed. And back to that very beginning story where, that there's a loop in there, isn't there? If they understand what we've sacrificed to keep this business going and what we've endured, and they buy from us and support us, the whole system, the whole ecology keeps going.
I couldn't have put it better. I think that's a beautiful way of describing it. And something like 99.4% is it of businesses or small businesses. And I appreciate we're talking about Harrogate, but that rule applies everywhere, doesn't
Absolutely.
it? That the community of businesses, they matter for the area far more than the names that get into the news. The big names really do.
And we make the identity of a town, because whatever town or city you go to, and again, I don't want to use the brand names, but there's always going to be those top 10 or whatever there might be.
The anchor tenants, as they like to refer to them.
And there's a functionality to them. There's a necessary need for those businesses, but the uniqueness of that town is in its independence. They're the ones that make it feel different to the other towns. They're the ones that are the soul and heart of the town, and they desperately need that support. I say every time somebody walks past my building, if they were to walk in and buy our coffee, our bar of soap, our card, we would be absolutely fine. Our business would thrive, and we would be happy and healthy. But the problem is that very few do. They walk past, and
the big brand names, the Starbucks, and I'm not criticising them, and their coffee's delicious, but they just have the spend, don't they? And the familiarity.
I don't know how accurate this figure is, but when I was doing my research before we set up the coffee shop, I read a statistic that said on average, a high street chain coffee shop will do between 500 and 600 cups a day, and an independent will do, if they're a good independent, will probably do 250 a day.
Goodness.
And that speaks volumes. The fact that often they're more expensive. If you go to those bigger brands, their coffee is more expensive. So you're buying more expensive coffee, it's not as good, and they don't know you, and they're not supporting your community.
Yeah.
If you just walked, and usually it's because the coffee shops can't afford to be on that high street, on that main high street. So they're usually on those peripheral streets and not on the main drag. And because it's inconvenient, because it means one street along, and we're all guilty of it. We all, and I'm not berating anybody as saying they're doing something wrong by doing this. I'm just saying that if people could just take a breath and think for a moment and just inconvenience themselves ever so slightly.
I like that idea. Inconvenience yourself slightly to support your local
business. 5 minutes longer, one street away. We all need that step count, don't we? We all have our phones and watches that tell us.
It's a health thing now.
What an extra 5 minutes just to go to one of those peripheral streets, stand in the queue for an extra couple of minutes because there's less staff there and it takes a little bit longer. Just inconvenience yourself slightly because it matters to them. That £3.50 is a huge amount of money to any small business.
Yeah, it goes to the bottom line almost, doesn't it? When an extra cup of coffee.
Absolutely.
Just a little bit about those organisations that have supported you. Have you had support from typical business organisations or ones local to Harrogate, whether through advice or putting you in touch where you can get grants or that sort of thing? Have you?
That's a really easy answer. No.
And have you ever found it? Have you ever tried? Is it easy to find, or have you just not been eligible?
I've tried a few times, but it's so convoluted. Often there's lots of bureaucracy. There's lots of things to go through and fill out and do. And very often, particularly in the early days of your business, you just don't have the time or the inclination. And we've been back to being very, very fortunate of having people that have been able to give me that information and help me in other ways.
Yes.
So I've relied on those relationships really to be able to get that information and move forward. Yeah. But I'm sure there are. I'm sure there's some great organisations out there doing great work. But I found that I've not had the capacity at the time to hunt and look and find those things.
I think that's a really interesting comment about, again, you are, not you personally, but one is time poor running a business. And it's not made easy finding grants, applying for grants, proving that you're eligible and so on. It's very hard to find the sort of commercial business advice outside of that group, which makes that group of friends and colleagues even more important, doesn't it?
Absolutely. Well, we're very long time into this business now, but I'm still working 6 days a week, as I'm sure most business owners are, to be fair. And by definition, they're not short days either, are they? They're generally much longer days than the average working day. So actually trying to get hold of a human being and talk to somebody is impossible because my day starts before 8 o'clock, it's finished after 6, and I do that Monday to Saturday.
I totally get that. and often people, not because you want them to, but people just don't see that, do they? No. And it's just necessary to do the business, but it does make it hard taking advantage of some of the things which would otherwise be available to you. There's a whole conversation there on perhaps what the banks ought to be doing to stimulate growth. And do you have bank loans? Do you use your bank or
no? But private investment. So it's come from mentors. It's been the mentors that have financed everything that I've done. It's been done very simplistically. It's been done. It's been legal, and we've made sure that everyone's protected because we each want to protect each other. But it's come from people that have believed in what we're doing and want to help the endeavour.
That goes back to a couple of things, doesn't it? It's the value of the local community, and it's having that clear vision that others literally buy into to make it work. And that's how independents have to work a little bit, isn't it? I mentioned the banks. I don't think they're really there, are they? They're just big multiples and
even down to, and I'll give the slightly simplistic version of this story. when we opened the coffee shop, we weren't a conventional business. We had a business. There was a separate holding company that was created with limited companies, and therefore we couldn't open a bank account for the coffee shop. And we went to the newer banks. That was too complicated. We went to the more traditional banks. They just didn't want to touch us because the computer said no.
Yes.
And it was only through contacts through a senior member of a bank that I happened to know that I ended up getting a bank account. Otherwise, I'm not entirely sure what we would have done.
It's a nonsense, isn't it, really?
So what happens if you don't have those contacts, if you don't know somebody that knows somebody that knows somebody?
Actually, I mean, it's an interesting aside, but when we're approached to set up new companies, it's not the setting up of the company that we say will take time. It's always the bank account. You can't apply till you've got your new company, and even then, it takes months, if you're lucky,
absolutely,
to get a bank account. So you can't just trade.
And even when you have it, it comes with caveats. We've never had an overdraft. We've never had any loan facilities through a high street bank because they just won't touch us. And so that also makes life very difficult. So you have to become very inventive and find different ways of managing your cash flow. And unfortunately, there are other ways of doing it. So, but you have to become inventive.
So this has been a fantastic discussion, and I think you said earlier we could probably go on for 4 hours talking about business, and we constantly are sharing our ideas. But is there anything you'd like our listeners to know about your business or small businesses in general, which either you want to share as an example of something you've done or should have done or didn't do, or just generally advice and thoughts about what small businesses should be aware of?
I think when you're starting a business, I think it has to come from a place of wanting to create something, but not necessarily think about the financial gain. And that sounds ridiculous to say because finance is very important and money is important. But it can't be your driver because you'd just be unhappy. And I've made myself unhappy on the finance side of things. When you're doing it because it's a joy and there's a love and a passion behind it, even if it's hard and you have struggles along the way, that passion drives you through. And even if it doesn't succeed, even if it has to change and you move on to something else, what you're left with is the fact that you've done something that you were passionate about and you've enjoyed, and because the money will just make you sad, and that doesn't make for a good journey because it's going to be a long journey.
No. Oh, I think those are very wise words. If you chase the profit itself, it doesn't come. If you focus on the service and the delivery and what you're passionate about, then that's the bit that matters, and the profit will follow. And if it doesn't, you've tried. You tried, and you move on, and you can be proud of what you've done, and you can change it and try a different way, but you can't be the motivator. And I there's been periods where it was the motivator for me, and it made me terribly sad and made the journey harder. You've got to pull that back and find the things that you find joy in and focus on those things. Oliver, thank you so much for sharing all of that with us. It's been an absolute pleasure.
Thank you for having me.